computer, and we're recording. So I think the objective today is to talk about what early live sound reinforcement was, and what it meant to be a sound engineer when that term didn't exist 50, 60, 70 years ago. That disruption from public address systems, primitive public address for live music or just music in general, and having folks like Bill Hanley and Stan Miller come onto the scene and change all that. You lived through it. I wasn't even born yet. Ken, you participated and witnessed a lot of this technological development at a time where it was probably shifting, where the second generation, you know, Hanley and Stan being first generation, where the second generation comes into play. But before I even move on, can we all just kind of give an introduction of each other, and beginning with you, Ken, since you're, speaking of hierarchy, you're at the very top, so of my screen, so go for it.
Good to know. Does that come with any special privileges?
Yes, I'll send you.
Not on the top on my screen.
Oh yeah.
So, like Jerry here, I started by playing in a band, and first started with folk music in the early '60s, and then electric guitar, electric music. And one of the things that became apparent playing even the small shows that we played for high schools and youth centers and that sort of thing was that getting the vocals out above even the moderately powered guitars, or actually they weren't even moderately powered. We're talking guitar amps, 10, 20. The loudest amp, the most powerful amp at the time that we had was a Fender Bassman for the bass players. So that, that was 45 watts. So getting the vocals out was a challenge, and using a small guitar amp didn't work. So I started working on building a power amp and then a rudimentary mixer, and literally built it out of a handful of books to try to create something that at the time didn't exist. In the mid '60s, it was if they did exist, they weren't locally available. So then I cobbled together a Bogan mixer and a home built stereo power amp and some speakers with Atlas horns and that sort of thing. And then from there, I kept trying to reinvent how to make it better. And I would say that probably is, I know that's what almost everyone of the era did. So we started from scratch and just tried to invent and reinvent and evolve. So started there and ended up starting my own company in the early '70s after working for a couple of others, and then doing a lot of sound installations and that sort of thing, and ended up as a VP at JBL for about 15 years, and then went into higher education. So that's my bulk of my story.
Thank you. Stan, what about yourself, man?
What do you want to know? Everybody knows everything. There's no secrets.
Just give us a summary. I don't want to, I don't want to know what your favorite ice cream flavor is. I just want to, I want to get.
Oh, I can tell you what that is. It's Umpqua ice cream from Roseburg, Oregon, and it's called Bourbon Cherry.
All right. Well,
all right. So
thank you.
I grew up in the little town of Holdridge, Nebraska. And when I was in high school, the band director took three of us to Hildreth, Nebraska, to hear a hi-fi system that a guy had built and had in the gymnasium. And that was the click that got me started. And from there on, I was doing I had recording equipment, I was doing recording work, I had microphones, and then I thought, well, I could go out and do sound. And then they would have college concerts it was Kearney State College, University of Nebraska at Kearney now. and that nobody had any sound equipment. There were just bullhorns in the end of the place. And so I bring my Altec Voice of the Theaters over from my house and put them in and do sound for things. And that's really how I started. And it's uphill from there on.
And then, of course, your long, successful, illustrious career with Neil Diamond, which is very unique. I mean, what would you have done if you didn't attach yourself to Neil Diamond for so long? What do you think? How do you think your career would have evolved?
Well, I was doing recording work at the time I first met him, and I was going out because I did some concerts in our college gymnasium. I was going out on the weekend because there was an entertainment agency in Minnesota, and they decided they would buy acts and sell them for 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time, and go around in the Midwest to colleges and universities because there were no arenas. Concerts were in colleges and universities. And they decided if they took a sound system along, they could make more money by selling the act for more money to the school. So that's really how I started touring. And I was, by the way, on tour with a group called Peaches and Herb on a bus tour in Vermilion, South Dakota. Neil came from New York in 1976. And his road manager said, "Hey, man, can you do a show with us next week?" And 50 years later, I was still there.
Incredible.
But I had lots of other. I had a touring sound company. I was building equipment. I had a very, very long relationship with Altec and eventually with JBL when Altec folded up. And I would, the people at Altec, they thought I was nuts because I would call them up and try to get them to build loudspeakers differently and boxes, and Ken will tell you that some of that, or Jerry. I was always inquisitive, and the things we did are the necessity of invention. We had to do it, just like Ken was talking about. We had to figure out how to do it. Now, I know Bill never did any of that, but I read in the book that he did.
It was so hard to get information back then. What were the other guys doing?
Well, speaking of that, it was around 1964 or 1965, you were on tour with the Young Americans and you were at the New York World's Fair, correct?
I came in a bus with them, and Bill had a tractor trailer at the New York State Fair, and they were on the show, and he had a tractor trailer, and I thought, I got to get one of those.
Well,
and he had all these big boxes, so he needed a big truck.
So
that was actually the first time I met him.
Yeah, I've always found that fascinating. You guys are close in age, enough to pin you as this very exclusive category of first. I mean, no offense, but you guys are the oldest living sound engineers on the planet right now, and that's an honor. It is. It's a complete honor. It's you hold something very important to the legacy of this business, to the music industry, right? So in 1964, you were a kind of up and coming sound engineer, getting your career established. Maybe you already had it established, but you were kind of building all that up. And then you're at the World's Fair and you see a tractor trailer roll in with speakers, for something even bigger, right?
Yeah.
Were you impressed by that, and not only that, did it inspire you to want to get bigger and to kind of do more?
It inspired me to get a truck.
And then you had to fill it up.
That's right, exactly. There's one of the photographs you brought up that I saw on there is from a festival that I did at Soldier Field in Chicago when Chicago they were the headliner, but they were a nobody band.
Yeah.
And it was sponsored by a radio station. If you look at all the boxes up on the scaffolding there, Bill was doing the same thing.
Right.
And we had to build everything. You couldn't buy anything. You had to build it.
Who would ever think that construction grade scaffolding would be an innovation, right? I mean, it's an adaptive technology, right? You're using something that already exists for something else, and by doing that, you've advanced the other technology, and I find that incredibly interesting and amazing. Bill, you want to get into who you are? We already kind of know, but I mean, do you want to maybe just briefly tell us who you are, where you came from, how you established yourself in your early days?
I came from Medford, Mass, son of a police officer, and built my first motor, I guess, when I was probably 7 or 8. Crystal set, 1-tube radio, 2-tube radio, Charlestown Boys Club to a 6-tube shortwave radio, and then went to the vocational school to study radio and television repair, and went skating one afternoon and fell in love with the organ player, and he was really good. And but then they played this music that was hideous on a little paging system they had. So I said, listen, it could do a lot better than that. So that's how I started off, by building my own power amplifiers. And there was an old man named Jack Boston who had a car with 16 loudspeakers on the top of it, Atlas horns all around it from the front bumper to the back bumper, with a 2,000-watt generator on the back, and a Masco amplifier on the front seat with a record player on top. Huh? So that's got me going in it. And I said, do a better job in sound. And that's how I get into it. And then, as luck would have it, I saw some stuff made by Paul Klipsch, and built some of those speakers, and I could turn and carry the corner around with me to make a little lower bass frequency response. And then, as luck would have it, after the war, television came in, and the theaters started going out of business. So I picked up a lot of all-tech stuff out of theaters that went out of business. And that was, I was saving the world with good audio. That's basically what happened in the music.
Did you save any all-tech voice of the theaters from the theaters closing down? Is that how you acquired some of those? Did you use them?
Well, originally it was Western Electric.
Well, I was asking Stan. Bill, I was asking Stan if he too saved.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get Stan out of it. Go to it, Stan.
No, I didn't. I told John earlier today about a speaker that I retrieved from a dumpster at the Pantages Theater in Los Angeles. That was about a 4-foot square with it had a Western Electric permanent magnet driver on it, and I hauled it around. I finally sold it a few years or so ago. I decided I didn't need it anymore. I'd never hooked it up, but I got with Alltech and got plans and started building boxes. We built 2 10 bins, 2 11 bins. We built, we didn't use wings on them in those days, which the theaters had, and we built voice of the theaters. We built the boxes rather than ship them from somewhere else. So there's interesting history there about manufacturing and building things. And it actually started in my dad's garage.
It always does.
And later on, when we were touring, we decided the boxes wouldn't stand up, so we put fiberglass on them to make them stronger and hold them together so they could travel. When I met Bill at New York State Fair, I had a small sound system in the bottom of the bus of boxes that were fiberglass covered in 1964.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Good.
I want to try to look and see if folks have questions here, and it's going to take me a minute. Before I do that, Jerry, give us an introduction of who you are. I think it's interesting that one of Stan's, I don't want to call you an employee of Stan's, but you know,
I was.
okay, well, I'll let yourself, sometimes, but yeah, give us an introduction of who you are and in this whole storyline.
Sure. Yes, I kind of got started with the sound system world from a swim team situation in Hastings, Nebraska, where they had a baseball park right across from the swimming complex. And I used to hang over there all the time at the swimming pool and used to go over and watch games on occasion. And they had a little booth where they had a little light panel and a microphone. And for some reason, I got up there in that booth one day and somebody said, "Hey, do you want to announce the players?" And I grabbed that microphone and Bill Watson coming up to bat. And there was something about that reverberation through those bullhorns. It just got me going right there. And I thought, wow, that's some power having a microphone. And later on, I got involved in music. My folks were very instrumental in pushing me towards that. And thank goodness. And getting into bands, it was everything from little tiny guitar amplifiers and then moving on to, in fact, Stan may remember a guy in Holdridge, Nebraska named Owie Olson. And Owie was a radio guy, and we bought 8 Qualm speakers from him, built 2 column speakers with Qualm speakers in each. And then we took a Fender amp and powered those up. As the band got bigger, we were doing some pretty big halls. In the Midwest, you can do some big 2,000-seat auditoriums and such. And everyone in our band had Fender Showmans. We were running, 85 watts of all those. Our keyboard player had dual Leslies. We, at that point, were getting up to 2 sets of voice to the theaters. And you really were getting those challenges. And I'm sure every band in the country was seeing those. When you look at those early days of what the Beatles had for sound systems, gosh, how are they covering such big areas? We were having trouble with, 1,000. Just had to live it and learn it. Stan remembers there were no manuals. We would try and get bits of information about what's Bill Hanley doing, what are the guys at Showco doing, what's Claire doing. There was no internet. And you just get these scraps of information. Oh, Stephen Desper's got a new sound system with the Beach Boys and such. So it was an interesting way to have to get information. I would dare say, again, working for Stan kind of made everything gel together, that there was real science behind all this. We weren't just grasping at straws. And also going to these all-tech seminars that Stan took us to. Wow, that was like graduate school in audio at that time. So there were some interesting times back then that I don't think are being duplicated now. Sure. But I always liked trying to approach this from a musician standpoint. I was a singer. I was not a real good guitar player, so I had to rely on my voice. And I was always concerned about monitors. That's one thing I really worked with a lot of Stan's artists on. Neil Diamond and I worked very closely together on monitors, the way we EQ'd and such, with what minimal EQ we had back then. But I really understood, I think, what monitors were, how important they were to artists. So it's been a great ride through all this. Lots to learn still.
Good.
Gary, I see on the bookcase behind you, is that an audio encyclopedia back there?
Yes, that is actually.
That's one of the books we all had, and that one and the edition before it, which had schematics of Macintosh amplifiers in it and things of that nature. And so literally pre-internet, there were only 3 or 4 books that I ever got my hands on that were useful in terms of electronics design and loudspeakers and acoustics.
That is the Bible right there, the
Yeah.
original version.
Yeah.
I've gone to that so many times over the years.
Jerry, I had a
Yeah,
question. I had a question for you. Are you working from 2 monitors right now?
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
No,
Excuse me?
Are you working from 2 monitors right now?
I'm sorry?
Are you using 2 monitors right now?
No, I am not. I am not.
If the direction you're facing is it's almost like you need to look at the other direction, like there. Yeah, I don't know why. There you go. Yeah, that's
There you
perfect.
go.
I have a very short cable on my camera is the problem, and where my computer is located. So.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but your head was out of the frame. We were just kind of looking at your room there, so I thought.
Oh, well, that's probably a good thing, I would think.
Well, a couple things. One is I want to thank you, Jerry, very much. Very interesting. I want to look at Facebook and see what people are saying. Okay, and we got about 45 people in this Zoom, and which is good. It's very good for a Wednesday night during a pandemic.
What else are they going to do?
Right.
I don't know. Watch us, I guess. Let's see. Thank you for this amazing opportunity tonight from Howard Freelander. Thank you for joining us, Howard. Ken Freeman says, slackers, great to see you all. Ken Freeman says, Umpqua ice cream can be had here in Salem. I don't know where Ken is. Mac McDonald says, hey, Stan, great to see you.
At my age, it's good to be seen. Bill, what about you?
Yeah.
Chris Foreman says the first Stanel semi was named Froggy, as I recall.
That's right. Because it was green and jumped like a frog.
Bill, you had a Jolly Green Giant, didn't you?
That's right.
Hilarious. Let's see here.
For the trailer.
Mark Steele. Hi, Mark. How are you? My friend Mark Steele is with us. Anthony McDonough says, love you, Bill Hanley.
Thanks.
Let's see. We have a Woodstock question. We're going to save that for everybody. Everybody wants to know about Woodstock over and over and over.
Woodstock disease.
Woodstock, man. Can't get enough. Let's see. We'll answer that question a little bit later, Mr. Stein. Let's see. Okay, we'll get Malcolm Palm. Thank you for buying the book. We'll save that question. We'll answer that question. Just repost that question. Let's see. Hi, Bill from Jim Hodges. Question for Stan. In what ways were you able to influence Neil Diamond's sound? Choice of microphones, use of effects, monitoring, etc. Before you answer that, someone says the audio encyclopedia has been by my bedside for the past 35 years. Good to see you all. So Stan, you want to talk about that a little bit? How did you, in what ways were you able to influence Neil Diamond's sound, microphones, effects, monitoring, anything like that?
Well, in the early days, we didn't have any monitors. And one of the things I did was turn a speaker around and point it at the stage. And I did that with Johnny Cash, and he used to say, he'd say, Stan, turn it up. So in the over 50 years, we had monitors, we had in the round stage, I had one of the first rigged and hung sound systems to fly on tour with him. But the one thing I always realized, the person that signed the check was Neil. Therefore, the band was important. They didn't come to hear them, they came to hear Neil. And so it was very important to the last seat in the house, Bill, to be the vocal clear and distinct above everything. And the rest of the music around it was the support for it. And I know that was a big influence over the years. The other thing is that I told him very early on, get on the microphone, stay on it. I can deal with it, whatever you do. But once you get away from it, I can't deal with
Signal to noise.
it. Pardon?
Signal to noise.
That's right. So, and he always did that. There's a picture that you brought up a little bit ago that I saw with him on stage, and I'm going to tell you where that was. Can you pull that picture up?
I sure can.
He's on stage, and it's kind of like a tent thing.
Yeah, give me a minute here. Okay. Can y'all see that?
Fourth picture.
No, that's in a console. No, yeah, no, another one. There. That's in the backyard of Robert Kennedy's house. And that was a benefit for Sergeant Shriver. That's one of the few things that Neil ever did political. And we were in New York. We flew down, and the truck came in to bring a little bit of equipment. And this was a benefit to raise money for Sergeant Shriver. Notice the side fill, that's all there is for monitors. There wasn't anything else in those days. And
What year is that, Sam?
It would have been in the very early 70s. It was right when we played. It would have been in the 70s because in 1972 we did the Hot August Night album at the Greek Theater.
Classic.
1972 finished that. We went to New York and did the Winter Garden Theater, and it was just when we were getting ready to open the Winter Garden, we went down to Washington to do this, and it was an experience. I can tell you that.
Well, you know, we'll definitely get into some pictures. I wanted to just kind of define or establish what the landscape of sound was like, you know, as you enter into the professional realm. And quickly, I know people probably know who I am. I've driven into the ground by advertising this book, but you know, if you don't, no one's going to know about it, right? So I'm John Kane. I'm the author of this newly released book, The Last Seat in the House: The Story of Hanley Sound. And this is, hey, there he is. Stan has, Bill, where's your damn copy?
On the shelf.
500 and some pages. 510, 500 and something.
Wait, Bill, is that it? Wedged between the air conditioner and the back there? Okay. It's the perfect width for that, by the way. But no, this is a newly released book with the University Press of Mississippi, and Mr. Lopez wrote a very kind, hopefully he feels accurate forward for the book, and it really kind of launches in a very concise way into what the book is about. And the book is multifaceted. It takes the reader on several journeys. One of those journeys is the complete biography of Mr. Hanley, but also the early development of live concert sound, quality live concert sound out of public address, and also summarizes the festival movement and other kind of fractions of the festival movement, like you know, demonstration sound, what it was like to set up sound at a demonstration during some of the biggest demonstrations in American history. Also, it talks about the competition, and you know, I didn't like using that term for that chapter because it really wasn't competition, because there was the amount of people doing what you guys were doing at that time was so thin. There were very few doing it in the way that I talk about in the book. So yeah, there were public address people, but you weren't that. You were something else. You were sound engineers. You were developing and establishing this almost like a new trade, a new career path for others to follow. So in this book, I have wonderful charts. I tried my damnedest to keep it as organized. For the non-audio person, a lot of audio engineers would actually get the language that I'm speaking, but for those who might get confused by a lot of technical language, these tables, I can't take full credit. Alan DiBiase, my former professor at Franklin Pierce University, strongly suggested tables, and it was the best damn decision I think I ever followed. But anyway, here's just a couple of paragraphs. One's called "Before Hanley, After Hanley," and it kind of in a way just summarizes this definition of first generation, second generation. The term first generation sound engineer / company refers to those who were first involved with the live concert and festival sound using a specially designed sound system other than the standard public address system. These creative minds carved out their own path toward jazz, big band, folk, and rock and roll sound innovation. In fact, many of these individuals had similar, if not nearly identical beginnings as Bill Hanley and his focus on sound, such as Stan Miller and Jim Mayer, Harry McCune, Swanson, and so forth. But during Hanley's golden years, 57 through 69, the landscape of sound companies for live music remained small. Even though Hanley Sound was the primary East Coast sound company at the time, others were dispersed throughout the country, in New York City, Nebraska, and California. Nevertheless,
In and out, John.
on what?
You're cutting in and out for some reason.
Oh,
For me,
did I cut it? You guys missed some of that?
Yes.
Everybody else having that
Yeah,
problem?
you're doing some buffering there.
Oh, throughout this whole.
Is your daughter already playing video games and using up all the bandwidth?
That's it. Well done.
Hold on. No, nobody else is on the internet here. What did you miss? Was it the whole thing you missed? Anyway, I'm sure you heard some of it. So, with regard to that, and I'll ask Bill. When you started your career in sound, let's say around 1960, who was in the game? Who was in the business? Who did you know about that might have been your competitor?
There really wasn't anybody that was competing. They were permanent installations. And there wasn't anybody tending to make an event happen well audio-wise. And I chased the Democratic convention and the Republican convention to try to. I spent a lot of time at Boston Garden seeing events come in and out. Where my teacher's friend was Bonnie Noonan, who was in charge of the sound, and there was an electrician, and they mixed it from a 3-foot square window under the grandstand. One microphone. It was pretty bad. I get the bright idea to try to make the world a better place. Maybe Adolf Hitler wouldn't done so well when I was pretty stupid.
Ken Lopez, you're a historian and also an audio engineer. Who are some of these players? And maybe segue into Jim Mayer. And as we do that, I'll pull up Jim Mayer's photos and we can kind of take a look at who Jim Mayer is, okay?
Well, I first became aware of actual larger scale sound systems through Jim at Mayer Electronics. I grew up in Monterey, and first starting to try to find parts for sound equipment. He was the only person around. There was the usual television dealer and the repair shops and those sorts of things. I was also a ham radio operator, so that's one of the ways that I learned how to build electronics. And also, like most of my contemporaries, not well heeled, so we tended to build everything. So Bill said he started with crystal sets and and single and two tube radios, and so did I. I just started, a decade or so later than him. But it was a lot of the entertainment was learning to build things and do things, and I just happened to gravitate first to electronics and then into music. And so when I first met Jim, I was also ushering as a volunteer at the Monterey Jazz Festival, which at the time the arena would hold about 5,500, 6,000 people, which was a pretty large show. And so I ended up getting to know Jim and asking him questions about that and how he did it. He was always very forthcoming. He was definitely a mentor to me and others who went on into the business. I just happened to be fortunate enough to live locally. He's the guy who taught me how to put a diaphragm in a compression driver and how to recon a loudspeaker. And I mean, he had an engineering mind and the hands of a craftsman. So he could do and did do much of everything. I also learned other things from Jim because, in the era, most sound systems were installed, and the ability to take a sound system to numerous locations and set it up efficiently was something that was in its infancy. And so Bill had this unusual method of going portable. He had a number of the old galvanized garbage cans, new ones, but they were filled with zip cord for speaker cables. And he had one can that was full of 10-foot lengths and another one that was 25-foot lengths and another one that was 50-foot lengths. And out of that, they were all had the ends were all stripped, and he could wrap together 2 lengths of zip cord out of any of those cans and put wire nuts or black tape on them and create whatever length of loudspeaker cable he needed. And then he would hook them up with his, the screw terminals to his Altec A7s and 210s and whatnot, and build a sound system by piling up all the parts. And then he had individual amplifiers and he would wire those up. So I remember watching that and saying, there's got to be a better way to do that. And so that was his approach. And I developed different approaches, as we all did, using connectors and pre-made lengths of cable and putting amplifiers in racks and in cases, and then not buying the Altec loudspeakers, but building them because you could make them out of better grade materials, because those were literally meant to be set on a pedestal in a movie theater and not moved around. So like Stan did, putting fiberglass on them to make them last longer, we all did something like that in order to make everything more portable. And I'm not sure, Stan, but I think you're one of the first, you and Tycho Bray, and then followed by Clare Brothers, probably one of the first people to actually build the cabinets, not for acoustical purposes, but to size them to fit in the truck, what we call truck pack. And so I don't know when you started doing that, but that was, it's just sequential steps of efficiency and how to make it fit better, work better, travel better, sound better, be louder, cover more people. That was kind of the iterative process.
The other thing that we did is originally I used to tape microphone cables together because I wanted to sit in the audience. People would try to run a sound system sitting on the side of the stage or in the back or under a bleacher, as you said, looking out of a little window. I said, no, you got to be out where you can hear it. So, I developed the first connectors, some of the first connectors and multi-core cables because there was no such thing,
Yeah.
Just by taping cables together and reels to roll them up on and all kind. People used to tease me that the wheels hadn't been invented in Kearney, Nebraska. That's probably true, but that's because I was air freighting and flying equipment around on airplanes all the time. And if it was on wheels, it got trashed.
In those days, Stan, you may remember that excess baggage was 80 pounds. That was the limit on excess baggage. And we could ship those boxes, those miniature A7 boxes, for $4 each on excess baggage. So as you remember, we'd be loading up about 20 boxes between woofer boxes, horn boxes, amp boxes. As long as we didn't get to 80 pounds, we were fine on all those.
We used to take stuff out to the Kearney airport, and the airplanes that went through there were Convair 580s, and they only had so much space for stuff. And we would take equipment out, and because we knew the guy at the airport, Larry Miller, it was a Miller that was there, it was always there. And we would take it out, and he'd put it on a few flights ahead of time. And one time I got to St. Louis, and there's stuff going around in the carriage, and the guy said, I thought somebody would never come and get this stuff.
So before we move on, Ken, I just want to let the audience know that we're looking at pictures of Jim Mayer from Monterey, California, a very early player, pioneer in the world of sound reinforcement. He wasn't just a PA guy, right?
No, he had a recording studio as well,
right?
Which was treated acoustically.
Yeah.
He did a lot of records. Joan Baez's first recordings were done there. My first experience in the studio was there.
Yeah.
He did a lot of repairs, a lot of installations, and sound design work.
Yeah.
But
a lot of second generation people, sound engineers, came out of Jim's shop. I mean, yourself, Jim Gamble, Tycho Bray, and several others that went on to work for McCune, came out of Jim's. Almost like Bill, similar to your crew people who worked for you. These generations of crew people who would come through your shop and go on to expand and explore the field of sound reinforcement and bring it to a whole new level. Mayer is very much Hanley's parallel in that way.
Yes, I would say so. And he was a very kind and generous man, and always willing to help.
Yeah.
I could call him at home at 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night and tell him I had an emergency and needed some parts, compression driver diaphragms usually. And he would go down and open up and hand them to me and say, we'll take care of the billing tomorrow. I mean, literally, he was just a really great man, and he was a good man to know. And his contemporaries in the larger cities, Swanson and McCune and a handful of others on the West Coast, were of similar ilk, and they kind of cut from similar cloth. Experimenters, tinkerers, inventors, so on and so forth.
So Stan and Bill, had you ever heard of Jim Mayer in Monterey at this time?
I heard of him, sure.
You did? You heard? Oh, okay.
I went out there to see Jim Lyons to try to get the job.
I'd heard of him also.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at before we take some questions. Let's look at some of these other pioneers that were in your field here. Let's pull up. Where's McCune? Here we go. McCune. And here we go.
I had the very nice opportunity of calling on both Jim Mayer and McCune and Ken Lopez all at the same time.
Oh, cool.
That was a real triumvirate of audio folks right there, I'll tell you.
So here we have the Harry McCune Sound Service sound truck with equipment on the right-hand side at the Fantasy Fair, Magic Mountain Fantasy Fair, Mount Tamalpais, 2 weeks or 1 week before Monterey Pop in 1967. These shots are great. There's a nice shot there. It's got a Dodge van.
By the way, for many of your listeners, they should know that John Meyer really came out of McCune.
He did. That's right.
That's where he did all of his initial work, and when later on was working with folks over in the East Bay, Swanson, not Swanson, Ticklenheim.
Yeah. So in the last seat in the house, there's a chapter called The Competition where I have these vignettes, several pages on each of these players, including Harry McCune. And I interviewed Mike Neal, who was a long time employee and audio engineer of Harry McCune Sr. And sadly, Mike is no longer with us. But when I went to interview McCune's grandson, he said, "Oh, you need to talk to Mike Neal. Mike knows more than I do." And I interviewed Mike several times. And in fact, Mike remembers meeting with Bill Hanley in the late 60s and getting equipment for various shows back then. So unfortunately, Mike was just the sweetest guy. But Harry McCune is an inventor. In the chapter called Competition, Mike reveals that Harry invents one of the first answering machines. A device that picks up the phone when someone calls. And back then they had the lines weren't, they went to operators. So I think he mentioned that he was blocking up the lines. They couldn't get to clogging up the lines with his new device. And relay systems for race car, raceways, just various other types of innovations that Harry. Everybody that talks about Harry says he was a genius. Ken, did you know Harry? Did you?
Only met him. Didn't really know him.
Okay.
I did.
Yeah. Well, tell us.
We did a lot of shows for him in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't get the equipment from one place to the other.
Right.
And he had a number of different acts that he was working all over the country with. And he would call us and say, "I need you to do a show here. I need you to do that." And we did a lot of shows, so I knew him pretty well.
Yeah. Let's see. There's a sound truck there. Ken Lopez, where would you place? There's Abe Jacob, who was a longtime engineer for McCune. Where would you place Harry McCune in this legacy, Ken?
Well, part of the first, it's hard to say first and second and third generation because Bill Hanley was a decade earlier than almost everyone, and in terms of the things that he did. Stanley was talking about inventing the mic snake, which is a funny story that one time, and I think, Stan, you may have been there, but we did at JBL, we did a
Right.
and there was a big table of people sitting around having refreshments afterwards, and it was Claire Brothers and the guys from Shoko and most of the big six sound companies, of which Stanley was one, as we used to call them. And I asked a question, everybody here, who at this table invented the mic snake? And every hand went up, every single hand, including mine, because we all did what Stan did first. We bundled together a bunch of 100-foot mic cables. And if you think about how much 16 or 20 or 24 100-foot mic cables weighs when they're all tied together, I did that and then quickly realized that was not a usable approach. So then I went to the electronics store and I found a television camera cable in the Belden catalog. And it was 27 pairs shielded. And I bought that for the astonishingly high price of $2 a linear foot, which was a lot of money in the late 60s. And then we went to San Francisco to the surplus electronics stores and found military Amphenol connectors and figured out the pinouts ourselves. And that's how I did it, and that's pretty much how everyone did it. They went through that same process to solve the problem. It's the most reinvented item in audio history is the mic snake.
It's amazing.
But Bill did it in the late 50s, long before the rest of us thought about it. So it was a funny thing, but we kept stumbling across the same things and having to solve the problem because you couldn't buy it. It didn't exist as an item that could be purchased. And my first, I built early mixing consoles. I built compressor limiters out of schematics, line drivers, multi-way crossovers, even power amplifiers. So we had to build everything. And that was part of the fun, I think. And it's that era that, to me, that separates, that's the separation point. Once you began to be able to buy the stuff, even from limited sources, that was a different era.
Yeah.
It was when you had to really design and build everything. That was the real pioneering primitive era. So that probably ended in the early 70s, I would guess. I don't know. What do you think, Stan?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, the accessibility of it.
You had to build a mixer console. You couldn't buy one.
No.
Or you could buy something and it didn't work and it wasn't big enough.
Never
I
big.
think something else that Stan should be given credit for is hanging systems. And I'll let Stan really fill in the story, but it goes back to the Colonel with Elvis wanting to sell more tickets.
Well, yes, there's a story about one time in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We were stacking speakers on the side of the stage, and he didn't want to, that was blocking seats. And I said, I'm really sorry that we're blocking seats. And he said, that's okay. I'm just going to give them to a school for the blind. They don't need to see the fucking concert anyway. And that was Colonel Parker. But
Yes.
then we started building the first real hanging, that picture's from the Budokan. The first
Budokan, that's it, yep.
in Japan.
Yep.
The first real hanging system that I built to tour with, I built for Sonny and Cher when their TV show. And the promoters were from the Belkins from Cleveland. And they said to me, listen, you can have the tour, but don't block any seats. Figure out how to do it. And we're going to sell all the seats all the way around. And they did. So,
John, go back a couple of photos of that large,
Yeah.
one more. There we go. Where is this one, Stan? Oh. Where is this one?
That is in New Zealand. And Patrick, who was our production manager at the time, referred to it as the flying junkyard.
Yes. That was going to be my next comment.
Yeah.
But you'll see that all of those horns and woofer elements are arranged in vertical lines and vertical columns to control the directivity.
Yeah.
And it was just a really complex rigging puzzle to get that pile of stuff in the air.
Yeah.
This is why ultimately everyone went to putting things in single boxes.
Let me on that note of hanging speakers, and Jerry, your mention of the promoter wanting to lift speakers or just remove speakers from the POV of the audience, so if anything, to sell more seats, which made perfect sense for an opportune promoter. I'm going to make an attempt to look through my clutter of photos here for an employee of or crew member of Bill Hanley's named David Marks. Ooh, I hope I can find it. But if you guys want to continue talking on that subject, that'd be fine. In fact, Ken, when was the first time you saw speakers flown?
I would have to think about that. I honestly don't know that I remember.
Well, one of the things is the chain motors and things weren't, when we first did a flying sound system, the chain motors weren't available. And they weren't upside down like they are now. And so I developed a winch system with a company that's called Thurn Winches that built winches for theatrical stuff. They were from Wisconsin somewhere. And I had them build a special winch for me that had a single drum that cables went in two directions. And this sat in a frame, and there was an electric motor on it that ran the thing. And of course, if the motor failed or something, the brakes locked and it wouldn't move. But we hung on 2 1/4-inch cables, went into the winch and pulled itself up.
Bill, in springboarding off of that, Mr. Hanley, in the last seat in the house, the Story of Hanley Sound is a chapter called The Greatest Rock and Roll Band in the World, and it's about the Rolling Stones, and in particular the tour, Rolling Stones tour of 1969, and one of the most famous, of course, because of the album Get Your Ya-Ya's Out, and several notable concerts, but ending at Altamont, sadly. But at Madison Square Garden, the Rolling Stones played 2 nights, 3 nights, and speakers are flown here. Here's a famous photo by Amelie Rothschild. And I interviewed a few people for this chapter, or several, one of which was Rolling Stones manager, forgetting his name, it'll come back to me, and English gentleman, oh man, I'm forgetting his name. Anyway, he reveals that the Stones were having difficulty at the LA Forum with the sound companies there, the promoters wanting to lift the speakers and have them hanging. Bill, you reminded me that CM Wench sent you a letter claiming that they weren't liable for your use of the winch in lifting these baskets up and outward into the air of Madison Square Garden. Do you recall that?
They certainly do. You have full responsibility for that. We won't allow that.
Part of that story.
Department did it.
Well, tell us, Bill. What did you do to the winch to modify?
You had to turn the relays and stuff inside it upside down, because they worked on gravity pulling down on the change in the direction of the motor, and that's how we ended up doing it.
And you receive well. First off, I interview. They're both well into their 90s. 2 of the assistant superintendents of Madison Square Garden, who revealed to me that Dick Donapria, the superintendent of Madison Square Garden, Gary Keller and David Hughes, I believe.
Yes.
He was very unhappy with your approach to hanging sound. You were called in as a consultant, and then of course you were hanging sound at Madison Square Garden then, but they had to call in a structural engineer to make sure that the roof could hold the load, but they were all fearful of them crashing down on the stage and onto people. So it's so interesting to me to hear Stan's story about how he discovered his way of doing it, and of course, years before, Bill, your way, and then in between, I heard stories of, and there's even images of the Clare brothers doing the same thing at Madison Square Garden in between. So it seems to be just this kind of knowledge, this innate knowledge by these innovators to figure things out, not by even consulting each other, but more just by troubleshooting and creating something out of a need, right?
Yeah.
In the late 60s, Stan used to work with a system called a Venetti hoist. And you remember those, Stan? You get that up about...
Vermet machine.
Me too.
Yeah. Those got up about...
Right.
Yeah, that's what it was. A portable forklift got you up about 20 feet, but it made such a difference getting the stuff up in the air.
Yeah.
That it
I
did.
used to say if a sound system was going to fall down and I put it up, I wanted to be under it because I didn't want to live to tell about it.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Face move.
That's
Ken Lopez used to tell us a story about the danger of hanging sound systems. And he used to tell us a story about in Texas that they installed a sound system in a church. And I'm not sure the absolute validity on this, but apparently the grill cloth of this JBL speaker fell off of the speaker and went down and hit the pastor, leaving the imprint of the JBL logo on this poor pastor's face. I'm sure they figured out who they should go to deep pockets to. Now, I don't know, is that completely true, Ken?
There are a number of stories, but Stan and I worked on a project for I think it was the Republican National Convention in Texas.
Yep.
And we designed a distributed system and put JBL coaxial speakers in the existing boxes in the ceiling. You remember that, Stan?
Yeah, that's because the ceiling was too low. And that was in 1984, 88. No, 84.
84, yeah.
And 88, then we did a hanging system in the Superdome for the convention also. But we had hundreds of those boxes hung in the ceiling.
Yeah,
Down in a distributed system because the ceiling was too low and there was no other way to do it.
As I recall, we had to make a special run of those 12-inch coaxials, and there were over 400 of them, and somewhere around 400.
They were 15-inch. They were 604 HPLN.
Yeah, and they were the ones that we were building for the UREI studio monitors.
Yep.
So we had to build a huge run of those, over 450. And we had all the drawings, and Stan, you developed the way to put a new baffle board up and attach it to the existing boxes. And when they actually installed it, they sent photographs and they did it incorrectly. And I remember calling and speaking with both the city engineer and the city attorney and saying, you guys have just created a tremendous hazard here because you didn't do it the way we specified. And they literally wrote us a letter absolving us of all, indemnifying us, and which I thought was astonishing. But to my knowledge, none of those ever fell out of the sky until
they didn't. But
so,
they put them up.
Yeah. But there are many, not many, but a few instances of amateur hanging jobs which have killed people. One was in a church back east, and I still under an NDA, and I can't really divulge much about it, but 2 boxes not designed for portable use or hanging, literally glued together and then hung from their corners, a particle board box, and they came out and during the service and killed the pastor.
Oh.
So it was that was something we used to stress at JBL was rigging safety. We did a tech note on it. We used to do it in our large technical conferences, and it was just a constant theme because people in those days were doing it in using methods and materials that just weren't rated for the cause, rated for that application.
They used to hang loudspeakers with rope around the handles on a flake board box.
Yeah. And with eye hooks.
Still do.
Right.
I remember we did a large technical conference and we paid a testing laboratory to actually pull test all of the various and sundry hanging bits and pieces you could buy at the hardware store, screw eyes and lag bolts, lag eyes and S hooks and all those sorts of things. And we actually showed photographs of the actual destroyed bits and how many pounds of weight they actually took in a static pull. And, people were hanging loudspeakers all over the country with devices that would only hold 14 pounds or 8 pounds. And when we showed that, I remember half the audience got up and ran for the payphones because we scared the hell out of them just by showing them how poorly most of that stuff performed.
So guys, we're going to take some questions live. So I'm sharing the Zoom link in the forum. There's about, well, we're down a few people, but we have about 25 to 30 on here. And let's see who logs in. But there's some earlier questions. And by the way, thank you. This has been rich and a lot of fun. And I think people are really digging it. Let's see here. Chip Powell. Chip is Chip is with the Philadelphia AES. All clips influence any of your own speaker design ideas and how to scale up systems for larger audiences. Can anybody answer that? Did Paul Klipsch influence any of your own design?
Paul influenced me. That's when I built my first large portable sound system that would go in a station wagon, and we assemble it together, bring our own corners. It was a miniature corner enclosure.
Cool.
Rebel 5, I think it was, or 6.
Okay, hopefully Chip heard that. Let's see, we have 2 people in the waiting room right now. Hold on one second. Let's see. Chris Foreman says, we shipped a big system as excess baggage on United Airlines for Richard Nixon's campaign to re-elect the president in 1972. Wow, interesting. You guys are all great. It looks like aiming that rig was a real challenge. I'm sorry we missed the association with that. Let's see here. Yep, Rick Chin, I just sent that Zoom link. So, okay, we have 3 in the waiting room. So let's see. I think this is John Jabulian. So let's get John in here.
Hi, John.
Wait, he's joining now. And David Robb is here. We'll bring in Dave.
Hi.
And Ed Blackwood. John Jabulian, sir.
How's that?
David Robb is here. Bring in Dave. Hi. Let's see, turn down your volume or put on a headset so we don't hear Ed Blackwood. We're getting that radio feedback.
Yeah, I'm here.
Put some light on.
Put some light on? How's that?
You're in the dark. That's better. Very good.
I'll put the light in front of me.
Turn down your volume or put on a headset so we don't hear.
There you go.
Yeah.
You're not in the dark anymore.
Put the light on? How's that?
AJ, you don't do lighting, right?
I don't do lighting?
Chip does my lighting for me.
I want to ask Ken Lopez, take a look in back of my head. What are those 2 speakers you see?
Those look like
There you go.
the little JBL, what are they called? One.
Control
Control
one.
one.
Control
Congratulations.
One, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Lighting?
Chip does my lighting.
you've got 2 of the first 4 billion of those, I think.
Take a look in back of my head. What are those 2 speakers?
We're getting some feedback here.
Those look like
Feedback.
the little JBL, what are they called? One.
That's from John. We're getting some echo from you, John.
Take a look in back of my head. What are those 2 speakers?
We're getting some feedback here. John, do you have a question?
Sounds like you're recording. It sounds like a loop.
Does.
We're getting some echo from you, John.
Yeah, that does sound like playback of the recording.
Yeah, when I'm putting John on mute though, it goes away. I just muted John, and it's gone. So it's the source, his source. John, I'll let you play with that for a minute. Let's take a question. David Robb, unmute. Do you have a question, David?
Hi all.
Hi, Dave.
I was just trying just trying to get on to directly onto the Zoom because it's a lot cleaner than the Facebook part of it itself. I don't quite have a question yet. Now that now I'm finally here, let me think a bit, and I'll get back to you in just a second.
All right, sounds good. Ed Blackwood, you have a question for these gentlemen?
He's got his mic muted or something.
Did my audio clear up?
I don't hear myself. Yes.
So we're not repeating.
We're not in some sort of delay or whatever. Yeah. Let's put Ed. Ed left the building. I don't know what happened to Ed. Someone needs to do a wellness check on Ed. We don't know where Ed is. John Jabulian, sir, how are you?
Well, I'm doing well, and this is a joy for me. Ken, it's good to see you. Last time I saw you, we were in Medford.
Yes.
And so I'm sandwiched between the guy who showed me how it could be done in '69, Bill Hanley. The only one missing between him and Stan Miller is Bob Kiernan.
Yes, that's true.
Now, the interesting thing about that was I remember seeing, Bill's system when he brought it to my college, and he showed me how things could be done and the possibilities of live sound. And Kiernan was competing with him, bringing speakers in, and it was interesting to see, the Hanley stuff and with the Hubble twist locks, and then here comes Kiernan, and it's like, wait a minute, I just saw this stuff. And so I remember when Stanley shipped some Nebraska-made 210 and 211 bins to Kieran's shop in New York, and then we ended up using those in Madison Square Garden. He was a guy, he was an interesting guy. He had a good foothold in New York City with lighting and sound and Broadway and the like, but that business acumen was a little tough on his employees. And so one day I got a call from Stanley. He said, I don't know if I was still in bed with Kiernan because he got his clients. And so I moved lock, stock, and barrel to Kearney, Nebraska. So, when you guys said, John, when you put this thing together, I said, this is something I have to attend, much like what went on in Medford.
Well, I want to say something to you, John. One of your first encounters with Hanley was you were an attendee at the Woodstock Festival.
I was an attendee of the Woodstock Festival, and the thing that I noticed right away, because it was so omnidirectional about that place, the boxes were so high in the air. I don't care where you were, back of the stage, side of the stage, up in the woods, you heard. And I made my way backstage and saw that big tractor trailer, and it said Hanley Sound, Medford, Massachusetts, London, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. And I thought to myself, this is something. And then lo and behold, he shows up with that very truck with the same equipment that did Woodstock, and sets up to do a concert for It's a Beautiful Day at Long Island University, where I was going to college.
What year was that?
That was probably early 70s.
Wow, that's incredible. So, John, hopefully you've read the book, or you're still reading it.
Well, I'm getting through it. You know what I mean?
Sorry. Sorry.
It's quite the deal, let me tell you.
There's a Kiernan chapter in there.
There is, yeah, and because I think he and Chip kind of like tried to join up together, whether it was the Schaefer Music Festival or the one out at there, whatever they were doing out there in Forest Hills.
Astra Arts Limited.
Rosenthal.
Right, that's right.
Astra Arts Limited, the Kiernan and Chip at Newport. And that's when Hanley decides to get the Wenger wagon.
So listen, I got something for Stanley too. You remember when he said to Hanley, I got to get me a truck?
Yes.
Well, Stanley, here, there's your trucks.
Kenworths, K-Whoppers, we called them.
Single screw, and they're all lined up. Everybody was off the road that day.
Yeah. You know, we, to give you an idea, those tractors cost about $25,000 each. Do you have any idea what one of those things costs today?
Probably about 250,000.
That's right, a minimum. And the other thing is, the first truck, we had a straight truck and it had a Texas sleeper behind the cab, and it had a 16-foot box on it, so it was a longer wheelbase. And my dad said, God rest his soul, this is great because we can save on hotel rooms now.
That's Morris. That's Morris.
I logged a lot of miles in those trucks, Stanley. That
Yeah.
straight truck, a lot of miles.
Bill Hanley, there's a story from Judy Bernstein, your longtime office manager, that when you went to go buy a Kenworth, you wrote out a check for the full amount. And your mother's, who was the bookkeeper, her hands were shaking as she was signing the check or filling out the check. I think that's pretty funny. John, thank you for joining. I see Mark, my friend Mark from Vermont is here. How are you, sir? Good to see you. Do you have a question?
Yes. Can we do this more often? To do this once a week would be wonderful. So enjoyable. And my question is, there's a lot of bands that are just getting rid of any stage amplifiers. They just have, would anybody have guessed that we would have turned to, everybody's just got a plug in their ear and no amps on stage at all?
It took me a long time to get rid of guitar amps totally from the Neil Diamond stage. I worked hard at it because I wanted to have control in the house of the sound. I didn't want the musicians running over me. And it was a battle you can't believe, but eventually we did it.
I believe it. Believe me, you did wonderful.
That's right.
It did take the confluence of a number of different technologies to begin to pull it off. You needed in-ear monitors, and then the ability to, at first, to isolate the amplifier off stage, so ISO cabs. And then, today, of course, you can use profiling software in a Kemper device or others, and Axifex or something like that, and you just plug into that device and go directly to the monitoring and distribution system, and you don't need any speakers at all except for the sound reinforcement. So it's impressive how it's evolved over the years, and it's I'm a guitar player. It sounds pretty good, pretty close to the real thing, and indistinguishable for most listeners, especially in a large arena or something like that. So
it's incredible. Mark, are you still producing shows in Vermont?
Not right now.
I know, not right now.
That's why he wants to have a session once a week, because there's nothing else to do.
No, I've been involved in a couple of things like this, but this is the best. This is the best. You're all just top notch in the field, and this is a very, very informative.
Did you get the book?
For many.
Have you got the book yet, Mark?
Yes, I do.
Awesome, dude. Good. Let's see. Any other questions? David Robb, you have a question, sir?
You're back.
There he is.
Unmute, Dave.
Unmute. There we go. Unmuted.
Sure.
Okay. Is it, can I share my screen to show a picture?
Let me enable screen sharing. Hold on one second. Boom. There you go.
Okay. Come on. It's not letting me do this. Come on now.
Hold on.
Oh, it's, I think it's on my end here. No, it's not going to let me up. One more try. Oh, wait, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. This should do it. Here we go.
Yes.
So, Bill, does this one look familiar to you at all?
Yes, it does. Wango Wagon.
I didn't realize this, but if you can see my pointer there, we can see the Hanley Sound logo on the side of this box over here.
I see it.
And this was in 1972. This is the it was a huge rally. This is like right on the corner of Bryant Park in New York City. A huge rally to complain about the I think it was the Cambodian intrusion in the Vietnam War. And this at the microphone right now is John Kerry, who had just returned from Vietnam and came to make some speeches, and of course went on to become a nominee for president. And a little bit later on in this presentation, a couple of people walked up out of the crowd, and it was John and Yoko came up and said a few words at the microphone, and then just kind of off the top of their heads started singing "Give Peace a Chance." And I've got some video of that, which is was really quite a interesting thing. But it took me a long time to really kind of stare more intently at the picture and figure out that that was your system that was there doing that. So I was a little surprised at the time.
You found it though. Good work.
I can I'll release my my sharing of the desktop there. Back to you, John.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually I've written such a huge book that I have to reference it. I forget a lot of what I wrote. I've been writing this damn thing for so long. I have to like, wait, I know that story. You know, Hanley would often do these rallies, these demonstrations and most often they included music. And towards the end of these rallies, I've written such a huge book that I have to reference. A lot of the music and the message were merged. So there were complaints from organizers that they felt as though there was too much of a festival scene going on at a demonstration when it should have been about the political message and not about the pop star message. But anyway, I write here, eventually with permits obtained on April 24th, over 200,000 people of various groups marched up Pennsylvania Avenue to the steps of the Capitol where they rallied. This peaceful mobilization included a group called Vietnam Veterans Against the War, who already had held a 5-day protest in April on April 19th through 23rd, which is, wait, what's today's date? On April 22nd, one of its members, John Kerry, gave a statement in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. John Denver, Peter, Paul, and Mary were among the artists who performed on April 24th on the April 24th event. Protesters heard new songs with tougher anti-war lyrics than previous years, along with some old familiar ones. From the stage, Kerry and Indiana Senator Rupert Vance Hartke spoke. On this gusty spring day, Hanley sound reinforcement system could be heard clearly throughout the Capitol grounds, all the way back down Pennsylvania Avenue. Interesting stuff. I mean, there's so many intricacies and details, but not just about the sound, but important political details that fatten up the content of how important it was to have good sound at a demonstration. It wasn't just a public address system. It was something that needed to be reliable. It needed to be big enough for people to hear, loud enough for people to hear. And that's not from my words. That's from the actual organizers who hired you. So that's a great photo, David. I forgot about that photo. That's a wonderful photo. Let's see. Do we have any other questions from folks? Let's see here.
By the way, I remember a call I got from Stan Miller, and I think it was the day before, yeah, it was on May 4th, the day before my birthday, 1970. And there'd been the shootings at Kent State. And suddenly, the University of Nebraska had asked us to put together this.
Disappeared again.
Oh, sorry. We had been asked to bring a system to the University of Nebraska to set up. And Stan, I'm sure you recall, I think we had to move the system around to 3 or 4 locations that day. But that was a pretty hot day after Kent State. And I think music had a lot to do with keeping folks calmed down.
I agree with you. Music. Bill, you even said that about Woodstock 99. Not that there's any comparison with what you were talking about, but just the fact that there were lulls in the music being played in between bands, that was a huge mistake for the sound engineer or whoever was engineering that concert, that there just be quiet between sets. Music soothes the beast. And of course, we all know what happens at Woodstock 99. You remember telling me that, Bill?
No.
Well, you did, damn it.
I believe you.
We have some questions here for Stan. Peter Moore, VP International at Alltech, sends his regards. He's not on Facebook, so he couldn't attend. He says Bill Fowler just passed away.
Oh.
Bill Fowler.
That's this message here on Facebook.
Wasn't he the president of Alltech?
Late 70s, yeah.
Thank you, Chris Foreman. A comment for Stan. I was at one of your Neil Diamond shows in Seattle and was blown away to see a small console behind the stage, mixing for those who were seated back there. Guessing you were sending stems. It was impressive that you thought enough to take care of those folks. I have not seen it since.
Unmute, Stan.
Let's see, any other questions? We'll be wrapping up soon.
Dan, you're muted.
I'm going to tell you a quick story.
Okay.
I got the idea for the rear mixer because there was a fire in a hotel, the Four Seasons in Seattle, and we were up on the top floor, and it didn't seem to affect me. And I was sitting on the ledge looking out the window, and a fire truck came by, and there was a guy driving the back of the fire truck. And I said, that's why we need a rear mixer.
That's fabulous.
Beautiful.
That's great. So I think we're about done here. There's any more questions from our Facebook audience? Let's see. Let me read.
JJ, while I'm thinking of it, will you scan that picture with the truck? I don't have that. Can you send that to me?
You're talking about when everybody was parked on Railroad Avenue there by the shop?
Yep.
Yeah, that's Terry Enlow hanging on.
And I think it's a little one from with a quick camera. Yeah.
No, that's me driving your rig.
Well, send me those pictures. I have to keep them.
Stanley, remember when we smoked cigarettes?
Yes.
You had a heart attack.
I quit on the 16th day of August, 1978, 7:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And it's a wonder I'm still alive today.
Look at this mob.
They're still kicking.
Yeah. Where's that?
That's by the A&W across the street from the shop.
Okay.
I'll tell you, Carney had it all. Runs, the sandwiches. It was wonderful.
Hey, one topic maybe for next time might be measurement systems and how that influenced our approaches, starting with the most rudimentary and up to today's FFT based measurement systems. So that could be a lengthier topic.
Yeah, I've been taking notes on topics, and mainly this began as a kind of a way to promote the book and talk about each chapter, centered around Bill's career. So far, we've discussed Newport in detail, the Beatles somewhat in detail. And my thoughts were to have special guests from each chapter,
Nice.
professional voices, whomever that might have been a character in those chapters to elaborate for content. But John Jabulian had a good idea. I should have invited Kieran, and I'm in contact with them often, and I missed the boat on that one, so unfortunately. But let me see here. Maybe someone chimed in. But to have another conversation about let's say the pioneers, that's totally something we could continue on. I mean, we could probably talk about this forever, and maybe include and dig up some folks and get them in here. And that doesn't necessarily mean just the first generation. It could mean, I know Pelletier, he worked for Tycho Brahe. Maybe we could get Rusty Bruchet in here. He's still around, and kind of just springboard and talk about how they were influenced and make those connections in one room. I think that's pretty strong.
I'd love to hear some of these folks on what's going on right now with digital latency, because I think that's a huge issue that's kind of being pushed to the side, and we're dealing with it more and more in all these systems as we get more complex.
Completely. Talk about how they were influenced, and let's see, any more questions? I think that's it, gentlemen. Well, I can't thank you all enough for participating, and I think it was a success. Stan, what do you think?
It's a half an hour past cocktail time in Oregon.
Sorry, man. Sorry. Picking the right time for this too. I guess most people have a lot more time on their hands these days, but
That's true.
Wednesdays at 7 seem to 6:30, 7 o'clock seem to work.
It's great to see all you guys. I mean that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Nice to be seen and not viewed.
Yeah.
Good to be healthy and not be dealing with
Amen.
what's knocking out.
Amen, John.
Yeah. But anyway, this will be. I'm going to launch a watch party on Facebook for another round of viewers who might have missed it, and I'll talk to Bill about what we could probably have as another topic. And obviously, everybody's invited if you want to join us next week.
Well, I would tell you that if you don't have this book and you're in audio, well, maybe you don't. If you're in show business and you don't have this book, you ought to read it, because one of the things you learn as you go over the years is these young people that are coming around and doing things now don't have a clue of how some of these things came about, and this will give them those clues.
Yes, Stan. I bugged you for how many years?
Years.
I was thinking like, man, Stan must think I'm an asshole. Like, what is this kid doing? But hotel rooms and at the Boston Garden, and so many. I was telling Ken that I'm nearly finished with this documentary, and that it for all intents and purposes is a student film. I never intended on being a filmmaker. I don't call myself a filmmaker, but I've been working on it for so long, and I have so much footage that I am compiling footage, and it is becoming a documentary. But we took a trip, Bill and I took a trip into CU before a Neil Diamond show, and it must have been 2014 or something like that. And we went in there, we got some great conversations, and I filmed some wonderful footage from that. But there was there was another time before that where you said to me, like, I asked you, is like, can I bring a camera in to film? You said, no, no footage. Neil doesn't want any of that shit, you know, and I honored that. I honored it. But I knew that I had to capture you at your console, and I wasn't interested in Neil at all. I was interested in you. No offense to Neil Diamond, but you know, and everybody else is just focused on Neil. I mean, I was blown away how many people just love. I mean, he's prolific, but I just never. I guess I just wasn't paying attention, and I brought in a little. I'm like, you know, Stan's gonna be pissed, but I brought in a little HD camera, and I was sitting right behind you, and it was towards the end, so I wouldn't be noticed. And I got you from behind, kind of working your operating your console as you would be a conductor of sorts. And I have some images of that, and I have some good footage from that. So it fits in nicely with the film, The Last Seat in the House, that I'm working on, because there is a portion of that where you are a character in the link to this. You're almost like a narrator to the link to Hanley, and kind of this this connector, this fiber from Hanley into the future. And I just personally, I can't thank you enough for opening your heart and your knowledge, and you're just being so generous with your time. I mean, you really gave me a lot of time, you know, more than anybody that I interviewed. So I can't thank you enough for that.
Well, I'll tell you where that comes from. When I started in this business, and Bill may back me up on this, but I used to call up manufacturers and I'd drive them crazy. Ken will tell you this. I'd get them all nuts because I kept asking questions. I didn't stop asking questions. And so many of the people, particularly in the early days at Alltech, the engineers and people there gave me time. And I used to go out to California and go down to Anaheim and spend time there just trying to glean from people, engineers, what they were doing, what their thinking was. And so, Bill, I'm sure you ask a lot of questions.
Absolutely.
I can corroborate that when Stanley moved, built his offices and shop near JBL, Stanley, we used to have lunch with Stanley almost on a weekly basis, myself and Mark Gander, and Stan would call and say, bring me this, bring that, I need to see one of these. And you know, he was not afraid to call and ask for things, and it was a great resource to have Stan so close, because you know the collaboration and the interplay was really tight. It was a great era. We worked on a lot of projects aside from sound reinforcement. You know, the early THX speaker system designs were built in his shop on Friday nights, and so many other things. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time and your knowledge and sharing your history and this this rich history. You know, I can't say enough. And I'll have another quarantine read next Wednesday at 7 if you want to join us on whatever topic of conversation we decide on. I think what we'll probably do is I'm going to try to get a Beatles expert in and talk about Bill's work on the '66 tour, and highlighting that conversation with the Shea Stadium show. And I have some awesome pictures to show. And there was always kind of a question mark as to who provided the sound for the first Beatles, or at least second, 65. I think we pretty much know that it was the public address system used at these venues in 64, but in 65, there are some images that are conflicting, and it's just kind of fun. A lot of Beatles people might be interested in that too. And nothing is as pivotal in live sound as the Beatles, because of the punctuation, and I should say the emphasis on the dissatisfaction of sound quality by not just the people around them, but by the band. The Beatles were very, very emphatic about how poor the sound was and how noticeably poor it was. And rightly so. I mean, they were competing with a lot of screaming fans, but there's nothing
That
like.
contributed to it.
What's that? They contributed to it. That's right. Yeah.
Hysteria.
Yeah. So the content of the book is driving the talks that we're having here, but there's always opportunity to elaborate and to talk more about the technology as it evolves at that particular time and where it went and what it was like then. And I always like to think that we just should have a foundation of conversation, and then if it goes somewhere else, we can always pull it back in, but keep it on topic. And that's why I kind of choose the chapters from the book also. But if anybody wants to join us, we'll be here Wednesday at 7. Just let me know. Plenty of room in the Zoom.
Thank you, John.
Right on, Stan.
Thank you,
Very
John.
nicely done, John.
Thanks,
Very nice
everybody.
done. Thank
Glad
you.
to see everybody.
Good seeing you, Stan, Bill,
Good to see you, Stan.
Ken,
Ken.
Larry.
Thank you.
So long,
David.
all.
Yeah.
JJ, send pictures.
I've got them on the scanner now, Stanley.
Okay, good.
David, you
My
being
internet's a
quiet
little
over
slow in Roseburg, but they'll eventually get here.
Well, it's just ones and zeros. It'll be there.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Gentlemen,
All right.
Good night, all.
peace.
Good night.
there. Peace.
Ken, stay on. Stay on, Ken. I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
All right. Good. What do you think? What'd you think of that, Ken?
I thought it was great. I thought the interplay was